Today's devotional is taken from 1 Samuel chapter 4 and 5, and the title of this devotional is Ichabod, the Glory is Departed. Well, Samuel's reputation was growing in Israel, and all Israel, we read, 1 Samuel 3:20, knew that Samuel was established to be a prophet of the Lord. Now, Judges 3 concluded with the Lord revealing himself to Samuel in Shiloh, where the tabernacle was located. And we read that the Lord began using his young prophet, 1 Samuel 4 and verse 1, for the word of Samuel then came to all Israel. Now, 1 Samuel chapter 4, I've subtitled, Presumption Precedes Disgrace. A series of tragic events unfolds in this chapter, and some writers suggest that the Lord directed Samuel to send Israel into battle against the Philistines. I believe the opposite to be true, for there is no mention of Samuel giving counsel for Israel to go to war, nor are the elders of Israel seeking his counsel. Now, Israel does appear, 1 Samuel chapter 4 and verse 2, to be the aggressor. And the Philistines, we read, put themselves in array, that is, as an army, in row and in column against Israel. And 4,000 men of Israel were slain on the first day of the battle. Well, the elders of Israel then gathered that evening, and they wondered why the Lord had set himself against them. But rather than humble themselves to seek the Lord as the generations before them, the leaders dismissed any thought that it was their sin and apostasy that had demanded the Lord's displeasure. Instead, they sent men to fetch the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh, and they believed that the presence of the Ark in the camp would ensure victory over the Philistines. Despite the reputation of Hophni and Phinehas, the sons of Eli, they were the ones who accompanied the ark of the Lord to the encampment. And when it arrived with a shout, as though it was an ornament to ensure their victory, the echo of that excitement echoed across the valley. The Philistines soon learned that the ark was present in Israel's camp, and they were afraid. We read, for they had heard how the Lord had delivered his people out of Egypt, 1 Samuel 4, 7, and 8. And nevertheless, the Philistines stirred themselves, so they prepared for battle. Israel would soon be defeated, and 30,000 soldiers were slain. The battle could not have gone worse, for even the ark of God was taken, and the sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas were slain. Israel, her soldiers, were scattered, and one young soldier fled the battle. And we read in 1 Samuel 4 and verse 12 that he came to Shiloh the same day. His clothes were torn, the dirt was upon his head as a sign of mourning. And there we find Eli. Although he was the keeper of the ark, he had not accompanied the ark to the encampment. He was waiting. We read that he was waiting by the wayside, and his heart was trembling. And then he heard the cries of the people, and he asked, what meaneth the noise of this tumult? The young man came to Eli. We read in 1 Samuel 4 and verse 15, he was old and he was blind. He was 98 years old, and he confessed his cowardice, saying, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the army. Eli, with his heart trembling, asked, what is there done, my son? In 1 Samuel 4 and verse 17, the messenger answered, and he said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and thy two sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. Well, when the messenger mentioned the ark of God and what had become of it, we read in 1 Samuel 4 and verse 18 that Eli fell off the seat backward. His neck was brake, and he died. For he was an old man, and he was heavy, he was fat. Well, soon Eli's daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, who had been killed in the battle, and she was with child, we read, and she was close to that moment of giving birth. And when she heard that the ark had been taken and the deaths of her husband and Eli, we read that this daughter-in-law went into labor. She gave birth to a son, whom she named in her dying breath Ichabod, meaning the glory is departed from Israel. Well, 1 Samuel 5 gives us some of the details that follow that great victory by the Philistines. They had taken the ark. It was nothing more to them than a trophy of war, and to be displayed and mocked in the temple of Dagon, their god. The Philistines, however, learned that Dagon was a feeble and lifeless idol in the presence of Israel's God. When they brought the ark in and they set it up the next day, they found Dagon fallen upon his face. They set it up again, and the next day they came in. And this time, not only was Dagon fallen before the ark, but his hands and his head had been cut off. They soon feared the very presence of the ark. And it was taken from one city to another city until all the cities refused to have the ark in their boundaries. We'll find as we come to chapter 6 that they actually took the ark away from the city and they put it out in the field of the Philistines. You see, Israel had gone to war without seeking God's favor, and the ark had been taken. All seemed lost in Israel. However, the Lord had raised up a prophet to serve him, and his name was Samuel. We'll consider the life of Samuel and what the Philistines will do with the Ark of the Covenant in our next devotional. God bless. Have a great day. Bye-bye.